So thank you very much for joining us today to learn about the dangers of confined space entry. My name is Ed Clapham, the Digital and Portables Product Manager here at Crocon. Before I get too into it, please keep your microphones muted. If you have any questions, please post them in the questions area and they'll be answered at the end. This webinar will be recorded and all recordings and presentations will be on the website shortly after the webinar at crocon.com/webinars. So a quick introduction to myself. I'm Ed Clapham, the Digital and Portables Product Manager here at Crocon. I've been with Crocon for nearly 2 years now, and being the Portables Product Manager, I have first-hand experience of confined space entry. I've been on courses and obviously have spoken to end users directly, so hopefully I can shed some light on the dangers of confined space today and hopefully give you some useful tips as well. So I'm going to quickly explain what confined spaces are, because there's always some ambiguity as to what counts. So confined space is an area that's substantially enclosed, although it might not be entirely. It's large enough for a person to enter, and that might be a specific entry point, or just might be a general area or enclosed enough for people to gain entry. These places are not designed for continuous worker occupancy. They are very much designed for temporary access, if at all. An area can become a confined space due to the nature of work being carried out or during their construction, fabrication or subsequent modification. So what we mean by that is, one of my kind of favourite examples is if you're building a house, the house itself would not become a confined space, obviously, because it's designed for continuous occupancy. But during its construction, you might have several confined spaces, such as trenches, where you might be working, and they are obviously not designed for continuous worker occupancy. They might be housing plant machinery, or drainage or foundation work. And if you are working within those, and there's a reasonable, foreseeable, specified risk in those areas, then that becomes a confined space. Now, I have just touched upon the mention of reasonably foreseeable, specified risk. I'll talk more about that later when we go into what the exact dangers are. But for an area really to be considered a confined space, it would generally have one of these reasonably foreseeable, specified risks. But if you you can still have an area that's still dangerous without a specified risk, and you still need to plan accordingly for that as well. So you might have a reasonably foreseeable, specified risk, but you still need to know and plan for an eventuality where a worker might have a sudden illness, such as a heart attack, for example. And how would you cope with that outside those other foreseeable, specified risks? So we're going to look here today at UK and US confined space identification. The regulations slightly differ, although it's kind of similar. And that just enables us to ensure that the guidance we give today is suitable for different areas around the world. Most areas within the world generally follow all of these points. So even though we're focusing today on UK and US, this is very much applicable across the world. So UK regulation defines confined spaces that are generally easy enough to identify, although it's sometimes identification is sometimes required as confined spaces, not necessarily to be enclosed on all sides. So the usual ones, such as chambers, tanks, silos, pits, they're kind of obvious. People generally kind of think of these when we mention confined spaces. And then you've got pipes, sewers, flues, wells, and any kind of other similar space where you know you're going through quite literally a confined space, almost just to gain access to these. and quite often the access is much smaller than space you actually enter and end up in, but they're still very much dangerous. So these are kind of the obvious ones, and I've also highlighted trench there as well. So others may be less obvious, but can still be equally dangerous. So you've got open-topped chambers, vats, combustion chambers and furnaces, any ducting work that you go into, and any unventilated or poorly ventilated rooms, such as cellars. And I think that one, sometimes it's a forgotten example. A cellar is a confined space because unless it is well ventilated, it has a danger, especially with carbon dioxide, which we'll go into later, of building up and displacing the oxygen. So that really is a dangerous area. And you might not even enter through your traditional enclosed space to gain access. People think, oh, I'm just going down some stairs or whatever, or just a ladder. Going to a relatively big open space, I'll be safe. Well, it's a forgotten danger area. Because scenarios are different for every space, it's not possible to provide a comprehensive list of confined spaces. It's very much dependent on the nature of the work, the area at the time, the circumstances at the time for that area. And environment checks and permits to work must be issued before entering the confined space. So looking at rules and regulations for employees within the UK, employees and self-employed must carry out suitable and sufficient risk assessments for all activities to decide suitable safety measures and precautions. And that comes from the Health and Safety at Work Act or Regulations 1999. From that, the employer's responsibilities are to prevent the need for entry, and that is absolutely the number one priority. If entry can be prevented to any confined space, that must be done. Entry to a confined space must only be as a last resort. The other responsibilities include duties and management of their people, ensure the safe working in confined spaces, if, again, that entry is necessary. They have suitable emergency procedures in place for different eventualities, and like I mentioned earlier, not just for the reasonably foreseeable specified risks, but also general illnesses such as heart attacks. Must have well-maintained plant and equipment, and provide adequate training for operators going into these areas. And it's always the employee's responsibility as well to report any dangers or concerns with the managers, but that goes across any industry really. So looking at the US confined space regulations, they generally split whether it's permit required or not. So if a permit is required, these spaces might be dangerous to the life of the worker if the space hasn't been investigated, tested or controlled. And this is defined as serious injury to fire or explosion, the loss of consciousness or asphyxiation, drowning from increased liquid level, or just asphyxiation from lack of oxygen. Spaces that tend not to be permit required generally do not contain life-threatening hazards such as attics, basements or crawl spaces. As trying it back to the UK as well, those generally have less specified risks. So in America, the host employer who owns or manages the property where the construction site has taken place is defined as a host employer. The controlling contractor is defined as an employer who has overall responsibility for construction at the work site. The entry employer or subcontractor is any employer who decides that an employee it directs will enter a permit required confined space. And employees have the responsibility to the raise concern. The employer can't rely solely on the emergency services for rescue, and that also applies to the UK as well. They must have their own rescue processes in place and teams in place. They cannot just rely solely on the emergency services for a rescue. They won't get there quick enough, or won't even can't be guaranteed that they'll be correctly equipped straight away to perform that rescue. So I've touched on the hazards of confined space, but I think really here, just wanted to outline them. So within kind of the icons that you generally be looking out for, within the confined space areas, I've got what the icon means, and also in the brackets for each one, what the specified risk would be. So you can have excessive temperatures, which results in loss of consciousness. And that is the reasonable foreseeable specified risk. But you could also have a hot surface as well. Not that you'd be expecting a hot surface to be present, but it could be a risk. I'm aware of a story where an application for this would be crawling into effectively an oven with a conveyor belt running through it. The workers thought the oven would remain off for whatever reason. Another worker didn't realise that people were in there, switched it back on, and that results also in those excessive temperatures. You'd hope that those circumstances don't happen, but unfortunately that could be a possibility. So you should be aware of those excessive temperatures. You might have flammable gas, which obviously could result in an explosion or fire, resulting in serious injuries. You've got toxic gases, which can result in poisoning or asphyxiation. It depends what the gas is, obviously its concentration, etc. But generally speaking, if you've got a gas in that area, it could also be a poisoning agent as well as an asphyxiant. So those two are not mutually exclusive. And then lastly, you've got oxygen deficiency, which results in asphyxiation. Increased levels of liquid, which also results in drowning, and free-flowing solids, which could also result in asphyxiation. So oxygen deficiency could be, you might have an area such as a storage container that has iron in it, and the iron can be rusting, and for it to rust, it requires oxygen. So we're drawing oxygen from the area, depleting that oxygen in that space, which is why those pre-entry checks are always really important. You might also have a build-up of other toxic gases. So you might have, for example, a plant or vegetation growing within a confined space. For it to grow, it needs oxygen, and obviously it gives off carbon dioxide. So it's literally taking the oxygen out of the air, replacing it with carbon dioxide. So that would also result in oxygen deficient environments. You could also have increased levels of liquid. So the obvious example here is a sewer. But if it isn't properly managed, you could end up with an increased level of liquid coming through that confined space. And lastly, free-flowing solids. The example here would be a grain silo, for example, that hasn't been emptied properly or at all. A worker might be going in just to inspect something. Maybe a chute has stopped working or is leaking, and just go up to fix something. Haven't emptied that, they might fall in. They might have a toxic gas above that, for example. They might fall in at that point with the free-flowing solids such as grain. That grain has nowhere to go, and apart from expanding out and effectively swallowing the operator, which could then result in them being asphyxiated or suffocating. So some real dangers and hazards of the confined spaces. So I'm going to go into each one now in a bit more detail. So a risk of fire explosion can arise from the presence of flammable substances or from an excess of oxygen in the atmosphere. So our detectors do detect not just oxygen depletion, but also oxygen enrichment, which is 23%. And the device will go into alarm at that point. From the presence of chemicals that can combust or spark in enriched, or in some cases normal oxygen levels. You could also have a fire explosion from the ignition of airborne flammable contaminants, such as flour dust or other dust types. It doesn't always have to be a gas. You could just have really fine solid particles, and you could also have a fire explosion due to leaks from adjoining plant or processes that have not been effectively isolated. So with excessive heat, it can lead to a dangerous rise in the core body temperature, which can be made worse by operators wearing the PPE and the high physical and strenuous work that they're probably carrying out. And generally, they're also working at a high rate as well, which would increase the body temperature in any normal day of work anyway. So in extreme cases, heat stroke and unconsciousness can result. Excessive heat can occur where working in hot conditions or equipment has not been allowed sufficient time to cool before entering. You could have exposure to the sun or another heat source. Equipment has been steam cleaned to remove hydrocarbons. And if any hot work is being carried out. So again, if you're introducing a heat source to that work area, you're already wearing PPE, you're doing hard work, you're always going to increase the core body temperature, which could ultimately to heat stroke and unconsciousness. Looking at toxic gas fumes and vapours, these can go from sewers, manholes and pits. They can enter tanks or vessels from connecting pipes, so they might not even be in the area that is of concern from entry, but it could be contaminated from other adjoining pipe work. They can leak into trenches and pits and contaminated land, such as old refuse tips and old gas works. And if you're using, go back to construction, but VOCs can also leak into those trenches and pits. You can also be off gases from other processes that pool in work areas. So you might have a generator, and the fumes from the generator could also pool into lower lying areas. And it's not always obvious. So I've mentioned this before, but gases like carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide don't have an odour, but are deadly. Similarly, if you have a high amount of H2S, that actually kills your sense of smell. So you might so normally H2S just smells like rotten eggs, but if you have a high dose, that will just completely kill your sense of smell, so you won't be able to smell that. And CO2 will replace oxygen in a confined space as it is denser. So you've got to look out for things that are not always obvious. And unlike all the other dangers in a confined space, gases are really the least obvious to feel effectively. I mean, you can always feel the temperature, and you can hear and feel liquid. You can hear and feel free-flowing solids, but you really can't hear and feel and smell gases. So they are not always obvious. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this slide, but this is just a reference of what markets and what gases are present in each one. This is a bit of a rule of thumb. Also use your kind of due diligence for the space that you're looking at, but this will just give you an indication of what gases are generally present in what markets really. So yeah, just use this for reference. Now, I've already mentioned a bit about oxygen deficiency. So this can happen from a range of different sources. So you might have combustion processes, including welding and generators, which actually take the oxygen again out of the atmosphere as you're working. So it might be safe to enter to begin with, but then your oxygen within that work area could actually deplete as you are working. It could occur when there's a reaction between some soils and the oxygen in the atmosphere. Again, it also could be plants as well, which take the oxygen out of the atmosphere and replace it with carbon dioxide. Following the action of groundwater and chalk and limestone, which also can produce carbon dioxide, which is toxic and will displace normal air. You could also have oxygen deficiency or depletion within ships' holds or freight containers, lorries, etc., as a result of the cargo reacting with the oxygen inside that space. And you can also have it inside steel tanks and vessels when rust forms. Like I said earlier, when rust is formed, it takes the oxygen out of the atmosphere as it reacts with the iron. So again, you've got to be really careful that when you enter some of these spaces, it might not be quickly apparent if there's enough oxygen there or not, which is why that checking for that is really important. And then we move on to the physical ones, so such as the liquids from confined spaces that can lead to drowning. You've also got some of the less obvious ones as well, such as depending on the nature of the liquid, it might be corrosive, it might be toxic, or it might actually contain Legionnaires' disease, especially if it hasn't been moved for a while. We've got free-flowing solids, which can submerge a person, preventing them from breathing. Materials which create hazard include grain, sugar, flour, sand, coal dust, and other substances in granular or powder form. And then you've got other hazards such as electricity, noise, and collapse or subsidence within the space, with a loss of structural integrity and those arising from mechanical equipment and working spaces. So I just want to highlight an incident which, thankfully, it isn't recent, but does highlight how quickly problems can go from bad to worse and ultimately fatal. So a man is in a manhole at a reservoir doing some work, and he collapses at 12% oxygen. Now a rescue man and a second rescue man descend without safety lines, and they both also collapse. More men attempt to descend and rescue, and they also collapse. At this point, the sixth man tries to hold a rope in his hand and lower down, and at 12% oxygen, he lets go. So at the end, the men are found dead at the bottom of the manhole. At the bottom, oxygen levels are measured at less than 5%, which is absolutely inhospitable. Anything less than 19.5, our alarms go off, and that's the moment you either don't enter or you get out. At 5%, this is just absolutely almost instant. So by the time the manhole is purged with oxygen 20 minutes later, they were all dead, and the oxygen is thought to be compressed underground, consuming the oxygen. There's also another incident example with an Oregon sawmill. So again, 2 workers are killed here. Oxygen is just above the other incident at 7%, with CO2 being at more than 3%. So they summarised that there's an algae bloom, and the bacterial action in the water resulted in effectively 0% oxygen environment in the water. Carbon dioxide, which is the waste product from bacterial action, algae growth, was liberated, displacing the oxygen that was in the vault. So as soon as that was dispersed within the bloom, any remaining oxygen in that environment was very quickly displaced, which ultimately resulted in these areas. So one little trick I would suggest is if you have nearby rocks, or you can in some way safely agitate the bottom. If there is some sort of liquid at the bottom, agitate that before you go in, do your pre-entry checks and your levels, and that will give you an accurate reading of before you even enter and disturb the bottom atmosphere. So just as some concluding considerations, we know that working in confined spaces is difficult at the best of times, and the last thing a worker in this environment needs to worry about is their gas detector. And we know that detecting gas is just a means to an end, and it's definitely secondary to the main task at hand, but it absolutely does save lives. Gas detectors should be unobtrusive and have a clear display that is easy to see at a glance. And before you enter any confined space, ensure that all equipment is suitable before entry. For example, your harnesses aren't damaged and that your detector alarms, lights up and displays work. And all of that can be checked during the device's startup procedure. They deliberately light up. This goes for any manufacturer. They deliberately light up, they alarm, the display will display and will have working graphics across it. So ensure that as it starts up, you're checking that the device is suitable. If it's not, get a different device, and if one isn't available, don't enter. When measuring your pre-entry, please use peak readings. I'm very much aware, having been close to the industry now, that peak readings are not always used when detecting these pre-entry gas levels. You drop a detector in using the standard settings in dispersion, and when you bring the device back up, it's obviously going to go back to relatively normal levels. The closer it gets back to normal atmosphere, and potentially by the time you bring a device up, have a look at the reading, they've pretty much gone back to normal. So you're never going to know what the actual true readings were within that space. Our detectors do have peak reading mode in them. Double tap the button, enter in the menu, and you single tap across in the menu to get to peak readings, which is normally like a double increased arrow icon. So double tap the button again to select peak readings, and that ensures that the highest readings that are detected will stay on the display. So as you bring it up, you know what your highest levels were, or in the case of oxygen, the lowest, depending if it's high or low readings. So in our product lineup, we've got our multi-gases that are suitable for confined spaces, such as the T4, the T3, the Gas Pro and Gas Pro TK. The T4 does the standard gases such as the flammables, carbon monoxide, H2S and oxygen. The T3 does the standard 4 plus more of a selection. The Gas Pro has the widest selection of toxics available within our lineup, and also a pump option, so you can keep the device in your hand and sample the air in the tube within the confined space without actually having to drop a device in there. And the Gas Pro TK is very similar to the Gas Pro, but with an added functionality that you can detect percent volume and percent LEL through that sample line as well, in that special tank entry mode. We've also got little icons here for Crowcon Connect, and these devices can integrate into our Crowcon Connect platform for data analysis and much easier compliance demonstrations as well during audits, so that you can prove that you've had alarm levels or not, and then you can trace those back to how those incidents were dealt with as well. So it just makes data capture and incident recording much easier. And you can also capture the data logs as well, such as basically the background gas readings that are taken from these devices and logs. So you can see the background levels as well. They are backward compatible, so if you do have existing Crowcon fleets, you can get data insight into those straight away. If you want to find out more, we do have a white paper on the dangers of confined spaces. We are writing blogs. We also have a dedicated web page now focused on the confined space entry applications. And if you do need more information, please get in touch at marketing@crowcon.com. I appreciate I'm bang on time, but there's still time for questions if you have them. Thank you very much.